We will move on our agenda, and I'd like to ask the next two panelists to be making their way forward. What we have done in these workshops is we've developed sort of a core curriculum, 4 general areas. One has to do with ownership, and of course tied to ownership is financing. Who owns it, how you finance it, so that's a core curriculum area. Plant design and network management is another one, and then actually the current providers, what are they doing, what kind of opportunities could they bring to you, and then the last one would be how to get your community behind you. So throughout the series of workshops, we'll be drilling down, as I said, in more and more detail in one aspect of those core curriculum. But the 2 presenters we have now is our launching, of, if you will, of Ownership and Finance Models 101. Terry Barnes comes to us as 26 years with GTE. Many of us are old enough to remember GTE. He is also a consultant with the Lexington Fiber Project that Philip just mentioned. He's also one of the best people I've ever worked with in terms of project management. Laying it out, here are the steps, here's the hopes you got to jump through, and he does that with a group called Solarity. And the one thing that I'm not really proud to say, but he does have his MBA from Duke. So welcome, Terry Barnes, to the podium. And then Terry, the next gentleman, go ahead and have us get ready or whatever. And the next gentleman that we have, I'm going to go ahead and introduce him because he's a very dear friend of mine. And one of the advantages of working across the country is meeting people like Joel Mulder. He is the Vice President of Sales for EX2 Technology. But when you look at his introduction, his resume, you'll see that he has many, many years, 35 years in, plus experience in both public and private models, from the design, construction, both in wireless and wireline networks, and all over the country. He has also been involved in many public-private partnership endeavors. And so the thing about, he comes to us and drives down with his wife, Linda, we're pleased to have. They're visiting. There are tourists, Philip, so they're spending money right here in Kentucky, from Illinois. But he was born and raised in a small town of 700 in South Dakota. So Joel Mulder understands our rural communities. And the thing that I like so much about Joel Mulder is his integrity. Of what he brings. He's honest, he'll be frank, he'll be direct with you, and so I'm delighted that he will be participating in our Ownership and Finance Models 101. So Terry, I'm going to hand it off to you, and then let Joel follow, and then you'll have a chance to do Q's and A's after their presentations. So thank you very much for being here, and it's all yours.
Thank you, Hilda. Kind of like Hilda, I would be a lot more comfortable walking around talking to you all down there. How many of you are local officials? So what I want to talk about today, Larry, do I need to do this? Actually, that's Joel's, and if that's it, Larry. What I want to talk about is more about some of the talk about it in terms of what the models look like as part of giving you some basic background. And then we'll look to Joel to talk to some of his experience with communities about what they've been able to actually achieve. But I want to start with talking about the the importance of planning, and then talk about the three models and talk about the three variables that you need to consider in your community when you're thinking about what you're going to do as far as addressing your broadband issue. The reason I was asking for a show of hands for the number of local officials is you guys that are local officials, if somebody asks you or your council says that you need to order a new fire truck or a new police cruiser, you know how to do that, right? But broadband is different. You're getting into an area where you have a lot to learn, and there's no roadmap that says this is how we do it. How many of you remember Yogi Berra? One of his famous sayings was, "You've got to be very careful if you do not know where you're going, because you might not get there." And I think that's really true of the importance of planning for where you want to go with your broadband network in your community. In this slide, even though Hilda talks about the urgency of trying to move forward with your community's broadband plan, it's very, very important to step back and think about what planning is needed in order to help you get to the end point that you want to get to. So what your goal is to build a network that is not only sustainable but also scalable, because as we all know, you can't see what the future looks like, and there's going to be more and more demand for broadband as we go forward. So why did I put up a slide that shows a map of the United States? How many of you have ever planned a trip across the United States? Have you ever thought about what you want to achieve in that trip? Do you just want to get there in the fastest way? Do you want to get there by using a plane? Or maybe you want to take a car where you have more control and you can select what stops you go to. Or maybe you want to take public transportation in the form of a train or a bus. Again, these are all relative to decisions that relate to how you build your broadband network for your community. And I guess I would reinforce that by saying there's not one size that fits all. When you look at what Keith did in Jackson County and Owsley County, that's one model, but not every community is lucky enough to have a co-op that's as progressive to do that. So again, every community is going to have to look at this very differently and see what size fits that particular community. Some of the things that you need to think about and as far as what model works for your community is what are the variables that your community has to look at? What are the needs and resources and goals of your local community? I know Steve Baker's been through that with London, and I think it was really something that helped the community focus on where they wanted to go and what their vision was. You want to look at your existing organizational and governance structures. If you've got a utility commission there, you may already have the basics of a governance structure to help you manage your network if you choose as a community to make it a community network. And you also want to look at your relationships within your communities. You want to look at the incumbent providers. Are they willing to step in and help you to achieve the vision that your community is doing? Or if you have a co-op, what can that co-op do in conjunction with your community to help you? So again, those are some of the things that need to go into your planning process to build your strategy so you know which method of transportation you want to get to your vision. This slide's pretty busy, and I'll say up front that, you know, there's models 1, 2, and 3 here, but what you'll find that is true is there's variations for those models where they actually merge together, and you know, a model could be a public ownership plus a P3. I mean, there's a lot of variation there. But in the purest sense, a public ownership model would be something similar to what Chattanooga, Tennessee, or Russellville, Kentucky have been able to do, where they've got a municipal electric company that really partnered with them to help them build that. Huntsville, Alabama, and Google are currently building a similar network. Model 2 is the private execution and public facilitation. That's where the P3 networks come into play. The Kentucky wired network that Philip was talking about is very much a national example of a successful P3. Model 3 is a cooperative model. Again, if you've got an electrical or telecom cooperative there that is willing to step in and help the community build it, then that's something that really can push your community forward very quickly. And Kentucky is lucky enough to have several examples of that. Some of the variables that you need to look at when you're considering your community network is how much control do you want to have? Do you want to be able to control how it's built, where it's built, when it's built? Do you need to have control of the cost and the revenue that you get from that? So what would be your thought as far as if you have a lot of control, what would be your biggest risk in most cases? It would be your financial risk. In working with Lexington, one of the things that we've heard is my money, my way, your money, your way. So there's a continuum there between control and risk that needs to be considered. The third thing is the benefit. Most communities are not going to be in the business of providing broadband just to make money and to make for the purposes of revenue. Obviously, they want to be able to be financially successful, but they also want to look at what the social, economic, and political benefits of that are and what it's going to do for the people that live in their community. So I just put this slide up there to look at what you might think about in terms of risk, benefit, and control, and what model you choose. And again, it's going to be a trade-off between the three. But again, as you go into the planning process to look at what's best for your community, these are the three variables that you need to consider. So, as I said earlier, what I've tried to do is give you a conceptual idea of what your planning process needs to look like and what some of your possible outcomes can look like. And now I'm going to let Joel come up and talk about some of his real-world experience that he's had with communities over the last several years.
Well, while he's doing that, I apologize. My voice will go in and out. I'm suffering one of those summer cold. Oh, it isn't? Then it's not going to work very well, is it? Apologize, folks. I'll try that again. I apologize in advance. My voice is a little raspy. I'm suffering one of those. Harry, could you grab me the clipper, please? Suffering one of those summer colds. And yes, I have tried Kentucky bourbon as a remedy for it. It hasn't worked real well yet. Thank you very much for allowing me to be here. As I said, I'm Joel Mulder. I'm with a company called EX Squared. I've done quite a few years working with public-private partnerships across the country, and really here today to talk to you about some things and just some thoughts that I have, since this is a broadband 101 scenario. I agree with Hilda and Lonnie and Larry and Philip about the items that they're talking about going through this stuff. Let's see if I can make this work. Advance, there we go. So, you know, the ownership model questions that I guess I'm going to talk about is really, as you folks are going through the process here, is really don't just think about 3 years, 5 years, although those are good things to think about, but where does your community and your area want to be in 20 years as it relates to broadband? What can you do now? Because I think what you'll find if you do any reading or background on broadband deployment is you will find that most of the things start many, many years before. And then the other things that I always talk about is if your incumbent provider can provide high-speed services to you, I would certainly run directly to them and make sure that they are your first option to take a look at to see if you can provide services with those folks. They are invested in your community. I see it time and time again, rural cooperatives, telephone cooperatives, rural electric cooperatives, cable companies that have been out there that have been taken, that have an investment in that community. And I would certainly encourage you to work through that. If that doesn't work, the next step would be that can you entice a incumbent carrier, Hilda called them CLECs, competitive local exchange carriers, to come in and provide a service within your community. There's examples out there of those folks doing that. And again, in subsequent discussions, I'm sure we can talk about that. But I guess what I'm here today to talk about really is, if that doesn't happen, what can you do to find and serve your community with broadband? I'm going to talk about 3 communities. The first is a community up in southwest Massachusetts called Mount Washington. Now, one of the things we talked about was make ready. We can feel your pain because this opportunity came, and it's about a year and a half old right now, and we finally just got the make ready situation taken care of. I can also talk about easements. We're doing a project right now within Indiana. There's over 1,100 easements. We've got to go to individual property owners in order to get permission to build on their right-of-way or across their right-of-way. So we'll talk this afternoon a little bit more about outside plant and those types of things, but those are very, very real things on the schedule. But let me talk about Mount Washington. As you can see, a very rural community. There is no businesses in Mount Washington, Massachusetts. As of February 2017, there were 142 residents in Mount Washington and 129 registered voters. The plant up there is 15 miles worth of distribution cable, and if you think distribution cable, you think backbone, and about 4.5 miles of that last mile that you're talking about. So you kind of get an idea as we're going up and down highways, and those homes aren't sitting right alongside that distribution cable. They're up into the mountain. The interesting picture over in the upper right-hand corner you'll see is a picture of a shanty. That is a shanty that is being built by the town of Mount Washington that will house the OLT, or the optical line terminating equipment that is coming into the city or the town to provide the service. So you can see they're taking an active participation in what they're going to do and how they build into their network. It's both aerial and buried. It's an active Ethernet solution, which again, we'll talk about the difference between active Ethernet and GPON a little bit more when we get into outside plant this afternoon. All they'll do is provide internet and voice services. There's no video on this. And I think that's an important aspect in a lot of these that we're seeing out there is the video side of the house is now being provided more and more on the over-the-top, the Netflix, the Hulu, those types of services, rather than what we've grown up with, which was the traditional cable television service. Out of this, pardon me, we will connect 89 residences. So the way this network was built is it is a sign-up network for these folks. And so we will build in, when we build the fiber network, we will make sure that there's fiber available for the other residences that are in town. So at some point in time, if they want to sign up, they can sign up. The town used $250,000, $250,000 from its stabilization and savings account to start this project and borrowed about $400,000 from a state loan program. It got allocated underneath another fund from the internet provider, think Kentucky Wired in this one, MBI, to provide a loan for it also. The funds received after construction will be used to pay down that debt, so the town will have some debt with this thing. How they're going to handle that is the town has contributed each town member contributed $300 and committed to buying the service for a period of years at a rate of $120 per month. $75 of that $120 comes back to the town to pay for maintenance, ongoing maintenance and operation. So once again, you can see high city or town involvement in how they're going to move forward with this. They went out for RFP, got a request for proposal to get an ISP to come in, and a company called Crocker, which is a local a local Massachusetts ISP, responded and is going to provide the internet service. MBI, which would be the Kentucky Wired up there, is going to provide the internet backhaul. Now, the important thing, of course, is any shortfall in doing what they're doing, and it's on their website if you want to take a look at it in very detailed form, how they're going to do this project would be paid by the town. And as I said, the people who might not subscribe right away still will have an opportunity coming down the road in order to do so. How rural is it? This is as I said, there's no businesses out there. You go up there, you say you ask your GPS to find it, and you drive out to a field, and it says you have reached your destination. You have to know where it is. When we're building the network up there, we're using two-way radios because they don't have cell service because they haven't connected their towers to wireless connectivity yet. So it's just it's a huge tourist area, and I think we also mentioned one of the things that is happening there is that people are coming up from New York City and want to go into this tourist area and with their kids now, and they no longer have, or they don't have internet service. And so it is an important thing for them. Second one that I've got is Leverett, Massachusetts. Now Leverett began in 2008. Leverett has a population, I'm sorry. Leverett has a population of 1,800 people. It again is like a select board, it is a select board style of government up in Massachusetts. It's located basically almost in the midsection, a little bit to the west of Massachusetts. Small part of the town had DSL service, but the basic service up there was just going to be satellite service, and they had POTS, plain old telephone service from Verizon. In 2012, Leverett issued a request or a general obligation bond with 90% approval to finance the construction of a fiber-to-home network. Doing this meant that the residents agreed to pay a median tax increase of about $300 per year over 20 years to retire the debt service. Our interest rate fortunately fell, and MBI kicked in some money, and it amounted to about a $219, $220 incremental tax increase on the citizens over 20 years. The other portion of the thing, the example that the citizens used was they were paying about $150 a month for satellite data, if you will, using satellite service for internet because they couldn't get it any other way, and phone service. The new new service that is provided up there by the ISP costs them for a symmetrical gigabit service is about $70 per month. So it turned into a cost savings about $80 a month for each one of the homeowners up there. Again, this type of thing, they do have businesses in this town. It's about 39 miles worth of aerial fiber distribution cable. So up and down. This one also, though, they decided to build to every residence in the city. So even if they didn't take the service, part of the construction contract was to bring the ONT, or the optical line terminal that I know you'll see sitting over there, up into the house. And even if the homeowner or the businesses did not connect, you were fiber ready in order to be able to do so. Again, an active Ethernet that we'll talk about this afternoon. It did include fiber, just like we did in Mount Washington, to make sure that there was fiber running into uninhabited areas, if you will, parcels of land that might later have buildings placed on them. In this case, they asked for sign-ups. 60% of people signed up before any of the fiber was being installed. Since then, another 20% have signed up in order to do it. Massachusetts law, and one of the things you need to pay attention to, of course, is Kentucky law and how you can do this. Massachusetts law says that you must have a municipal light plant, which they do, and created that, and created this, and then they put the organization that owns the fiber into that organization. And then they've subcontracted the maintenance and the operation out to other third parties. So there's just another example of how a town can do this. Final example that I'll talk about is the city of Ammon. Ammon is a city that's a larger city. It's about 12 or 14,000 people. I'm sorry, 12 or 14,000 people. The way the Ammon network started is they started by connecting their water departments, their internal utility departments. And the reason that happened is the water departments kept on asking, can I get greater and greater bandwidth? And they kept on saying, we could not get, we can't provide that, or if we can, we've got to do X, Y, and Z. It's going to cost $80,000 and a recurring fee of $3,000 in order to do it. The city of Ammon's folks said, I think we can build it for less than that. So they started to build out their network. Well, that brought on other municipal buildings coming to them and saying, well, if you're doing that, can you build me a network over to my building and hook into the Ammon network? And what happened at the end of the day was the water department kept on building the network and then turned it over to the city because the water department did not want to operate the network, but the city took it on. So when they did that, as Hilda was showing with the fiber, they put some extra fiber in the ground. Well, more and more people started asking, can I use this facility? And so they now have 40 businesses on the network. They have wireless towers connected. Again, Ammon does not provide lit services, just to make a point there, to any of these users. They just provide the backbone, if you will, or the carrying network. One of the interesting things that happened as they started connecting is a public safety aspect. There were cameras already in the schools, and Ammon applied for and got an application for an active shooter application from the Department of Justice. Put in that application and were awarded a grant to connect those schools onto the network. What the active shooter situation, of course, does is with the broadband network, if something would happen at one of these schools, the cameras would go directly via software within 3 seconds to where a shot was heard within the school. It would then automatically be transmitted to the public safety department and then pushed out into the police cars, giving the advantage for the first responders to be able to see and know and have access to where the shooter would be, where the shooter is, how many there are, what type of weapons, and all the information that you would really want in this type of a scenario. So as we talk about smart cities and we talk about things that you can do beyond just providing internet service, certainly telemedicine and public safety is one of those things. But the broadband situation came a little bit later. All of a sudden, people started asking, well, if you're doing this and you're doing that, can we do something and provide fiber to the home? So they started working with what they call local improvement districts. What Ammon did was they said we needed 60% of the residents to sign up and during the phase 1 of the project. And residents can either opt in or they can opt out to being part of the fiber to the home. If they opt in, what they do is they commit to paying $3,000 over 20 years on their property tax, or about $20 per month on their property tax bill to be connected to the internet. The unique thing really for Ammon is that Ammon is not the provider to the end user. They are just the backbone that brings it to the user. The box has actually access to 5 ISPs. So if you're a homeowner out there in Ammon, Idaho, and you decided to get service from X one day and Y the next day, you could dynamically program that box in order to move from vendor to vendor. So they're not a single source provider, so that's open access at the box level, okay? So they make sure that, and once again, so Ammon is not in competition with any of the incumbent providers. The incumbent providers, if they would so choose, can also buy on and utilize the network. So those are just 3 examples. There's multiple other ones out there that people have used to show where you can take that next step if you so choose to do so with local ownership of the network. Hilda, that's what I have.
So you're not going to believe this, but I actually have a question. You know, one thing that I took to heart when both of you were talking, you really emphasized the importance of working with the local providers. And I don't think I'd really even considered cell phone. You know, would you make a recommendation that when these communities are looking at doing something, you know, within their area to the unserved and underserved, that they bring in the cell phone providers as well as the cable TV people as well as the internet providers?
Certainly. Part of the biggest business I think that you will see out there right now is connectivity to cell phone towers. The latest and greatest, of course, is 5G, which says that it will up the requirements to fiber to these cell towers. But certainly wireless carriers are certainly a big impact on deployment of fiber into rural areas especially. The other portion that you're seeing is, depending really on the size of your city, is the smart city application with streetlights, with DAS, as they call it, the distributed antenna systems within the local communities, and small cell deployment within those cities. All of them have implications not only for the wireless carrier, but also for your city as far as connectivity between those light poles and LED lights and those things.
I know, Larry, in Lexington, what we did was, again, after we went through the planning process and understood where the city wanted to go, issuing an RFI, which is a really informal way to start conversations with your potential vendors, potential partners. Absolutely, we talked to the incumbents, and we're still talking to the incumbents. So I think the more inclusive you can make that, the better information you're going to have as a community to make a decision from.
Thank you. We have some questions, I'm sure, right? Like, you guys know all about this stuff. Nobody's got a question. Thank you so much.
The Ammon, Idaho model that you presented, I'd seen a little bit of that before, and seems like something that would work well in a small town? Because if I remember right, there are about 7,000 population, somewhere close to that. Pretty small town.
13.
Okay. I understand they have multiple ISPs using the system that they own. Who manages that? Who does the maintenance, and does the city do that in-house, or do they also have kind of an overall system manager that recruits the ISPs, polices them, and?
Yeah, the outside plant maintenance is done by the city of Hammond. So they're doing it. So the responsibility, it always comes down to people like to ask who owns the customer. You know, so the customer on the outside plant is owned, and the software within the device is smart enough to tell whether I've got a problem at the device or if I've got a problem on the fiber. So they're looking at it that way. Does that answer your question? Yeah. So the other interesting thing is if you take a look at, and again, if you go to Hammond, Idaho's website, and just take a look, there's a wealth of information there, including talks by Bruce Patterson, who's the IT director, and the mayor talking about their network, and more information than I can give you about how they operate and take care of the network themselves. But it is quite an interesting network.
Next question.
So, Terry and Joel, one of the reasons we put this in is ownership. If I'm a local community, nobody's providing broadband, okay? Whether I'm the chamber, the economic development person, or the elected official. No one's providing broadband. And I look at the models. What you've basically, I'm just trying to recap here. What you said is I can build the network and manage the network, right, Terry? I can build the network and lease it to an operator, another provider, or I can bring in the provider and let them build the network and operate the network, and then how does it benefit, what does my community get for that piece of it? Is this not working? Okay. Is it turned on?
I think in the third scenario that you brought up there, Hilda, what you would find would be, if you look at that continuum between control and risk, you would lose a lot of the control that you have over the network. And again, you know, who does it get built to? How fast does it get built? But you would also reduce your financial risk as a community because you've got a private provider doing it. And again, those are decisions that communities are going to have to make.
So, Joel, if you look at Leverett or Ammon, did they go through a process of weeding out how they would get to that ownership? Because the ownership is going to dictate the financial piece. Is that right?
That's correct.
And so, if these are community leaders that are trying to figure out how am I going to bring it to my community, and we see the price tag, and it's sort of astounding for us. And if we don't have a Steve Baker at the utility that's digging in and learning about it or whatever, what do we start thinking about? How do we get to the point of making intelligent decisions? What do we need to do as community leaders?
Well, there are funding programs that are out there. There's financing programs that are out there. There's folks looking to invest within rural communities. Don't kid yourselves. That investment can take some intrigue and some conversation on how to be able to do that. I think you're with a broadband 101. You're starting at the beginning of can it get done? And I can tell you that in each one of those communities, there are people that have been down this road, and I'm not saying, once again, that those models are the exact models, but there are people that have been down the roads that you folks are looking to do right now that would be more than willing to talk to you directly about what their experience has been and what process they've been through locally and politically and state-wise and federally in order to accomplish what they wanted to have happen. I mean, you mentioned Huntsville. The Huntsville model is an intriguing model because because Google has finally said, you know what, maybe we do have to have some revenue in order to give a return on everything we spent in some of these cities. So when they found a city like Huntsville saying, I need to deploy smart grid, I need to deploy AMI, meter reading, and I've got to build a fiber network anyway, would you be willing to be an anchor tenant onto that network? You know, they found a willing participant in Google. And of course, that's one of the other models. Google will not own that model, or not own that infrastructure. Google will be a dark fiber user on that infrastructure.
So, okay, question about, good, because that's what I'm trying to get. I want to hear from you all. We want to know what you all are thinking through all this. Sorry, Larry, I just took over your job. All right.
So I don't know if you can quite how to say if I can ask this, but there's several models that we're looking at on the kind of this continuum of a completely publicly owned and operated project going over to a privately owned or public-private partnership. When you have a project that is funded with public money, but then is, for example, operated by a private company, private companies these days especially, perhaps even more than in the past, are in the business of maximizing profit. So what kind of protections are in place to prevent a private operator from coming in and, rather than extending that public good as technologies expand, to simply sit as the proprietor of this network and maximize profit as we have seen many other private companies do? What kind of protections are in place for that?
Very good question.
Joel probably can speak to this in more detail than I can, but my first thought is,
Terry?
my first thought is how do you put the governance in to make sure that you can have a throttle on what that private company is allowed to do. And again, one of the other things that you're trying to achieve and look at is how do you achieve competition?
Many times the good old broadband is called that fourth utility, and that's why I led the conversation really off with broadband is I would look to incumbent suppliers first because of that internal use. Now, you know, the second thing is bringing somebody in. The third thing is how can you do that yourself if nobody else will do it for you? And I think that's really the question. And bringing somebody else in with your own ownership gives you some capability to point and choose how you're going to do it. And that's the reason I use those three specific examples. There's no golden answer to what your question is because that is always a concern. Did I just create a third monopoly within the location that we're working on in the city? Just because I don't like X or just because I don't like Y, if I bring in Z, is that doing me any good on doing that? And especially when you're talking about using public funds in order to do it. I mean, there is, that's why we see a lot of times, a lot of those thou shalts on the contractual language, thou shalt deliver service to here, thou shalt do those types of things. So hopefully, does that answer your question?
So the legal contract and negotiating part of it all is where you would address some of those concerns. And you know, the thing I would say on this, again, having looked at many loan applications, there is no easy way to do this. I said it earlier. I mean, if it were easy, it would already be done. So we're not coming here saying, I don't think any of these folks are saying, yeah, here's the golden goose or whatever. You know, it's hard work, and getting to the point of making those decisions is a lot of work and a lot of effort. One last question to this panel that's been there and done it at the local level. Coming to you.
So I'm a finance guy. I don't know a lot about fiber, but the question is if Kentucky Wired's going to drag a line in, that's my vernacular, how do you meaning any of us, organizational structures, co-op is what I'm preferring, but any, structure that chooses to take a swing at this thing, who is it that gets to the brass ring in this and says, hey, those 4 nodes belong to us now? How does that ownership of the right to a territory, et cetera, to make sure that the process is done as the way we would all like to see it done in our own areas? Who gets access? Who owns those nodes? Who when Kentucky Wired gets through and they wave goodbye, who can acquire the rights to that are exclusive, that would allow for somebody to properly finance and develop the system?
Thank you.
And you're hitting exactly where I preach and preach and preach, because I am on usually that side that is the design, build, do all those types of things. And over the years of experience, I learned quickly is, guys, don't wait for me to get done and wave goodbye before you start the process to figure out how you're going to use it. Because if you wait too long, all of a sudden you're going to open your eyes and the thing is going to be sitting there and little light flashes are coming out and going, use me, use me. And if you remember what I said, each one of these things, it's historically true, is going to take you 5 to 10 years. And up to that long period of time to organize and go through and do the things that you need to do should you decide to build your own network. It's not something that you flick the switch on and are able to do right away. So to answer your question, the nodes in these, and again, I'll speak to the Iowa Communications Network and Mass Broadband and EagleNet, the ones I've got, is there's a node sitting there and service will be delivered to there. And that internet service then is available to you folks out there to use as you would wish to connect the last mile. So the sooner you get organized within the community, better off you are. If I'm Kentucky Wired, or what I found in these other locations is the more active you are, it's the squeaky wheel. So make sure you're the squeaky wheel. I'm ready to go. I want to build. I'm going to do this. Here's the plans. Here's my community activists that are working on this thing. And talk with your neighbors, as I know Philip said, is now is the time, as they're deploying this network, to get going. And if there's questions, I'm sure Philip and the folks can help you answer some of those preliminary questions. How do I attach? What's the cost going to be? Well, that can be nebulous, I'm sure, but typically you can make some things that within a generality, and here's how it's going to work, and here's what the contractual relationship will be between that entity and your entity. But again, I would highly encourage you guys to get out there and get after it right now, because then we'll talk about it, and I feel the pain, as I said, with permitting and make-ready on Mount Washington. 100 and I don't know how many poles it was, but it took us darn near a year and a half on make-ready with Verizon and National Grid. And I can tell the customer, until I'm blue in the face, how long it's going to take, and I'm never right on being able to figure out how long it's going to take to be able to access it. Typically, a construction company, once you get the right to do something, you can build like you can't believe. But it's getting the right of access that is generally the most difficult part of any construction build. But they're going to get that stuff done, and then they're going to start churning and burning. And so, as I said, get ready. Aaron?
I want to go back to the last question that Hilda asked Philip. One way you can get some assets for your community is having the overbill by Kentucky Wired when they come through your community. And you don't necessarily have to know exactly how you're going to use that, but that asset is going to be there so that you don't have to go back and rework that to build it later. So if you've got any opportunity to do that, I know two of the clients that we're working with at Solarity have both chosen to do that.
All right, thank you all very much. Give them a round of applause. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.